Once I come up with the idea for a level, I begin work on it by prototyping the level in Godot. I do this by stretching out a bunch of CSG boxes. When doing this, I use a basic tile material with UVs set to World Triplanar. This means that the textures should have the same scale, position, and rotation regardless of how the object they're applied to is placed. The consistently sized tiles are useful for understanding how big an area is while creating it. Once I've finished the basic level layout, I slap some actual materials on the CSG boxes and mess around with the visuals until I figure out the style for the map. I started the process of material creation for this map by making a snow material. I needed to give it the appearance of slight depth variation, so I generated a normal map from a tileable noise texture. It also needed to sparkle like real snow, so I gave it this high contrast roughness texture. That only worked with light shining on the snow. It didn't sparkle in the shadows. I resolved that by adding an emission texture to make it appear to sparkle in low light areas. The rock material was pretty basic, as I just made a picture of a rocky surface tileable and gave it a bluish hue for an icy look. One thing of note, however, is that the ice rock material's texture is actually quite high resolution, but it's scaled to match the other low-res graphics, meaning that it covers a very large area before it loops. I did this because if it was smaller scale, the tiling would be noticeable. It would look repetitive and not very smooth. Next, I messed around with the world environment and the sunlight for a bit, trying to tweak the visuals until it looked like early morning on a cloudy day, with some light snow. Once that was done, I added some basic snow particles. They spawn inside of a giant sphere that always floats above the player, so that the particles will be visible everywhere you go in the level. They fade in when they spawn and fade out when they despawn, to make it much smoother than if they just suddenly popped in and out of existence. I was generally liking how the level looked at that point, so I moved on to finishing the rough level prototype. One of the most useful features built into Godot for level creation is the ability to export scenes as GLTF files. I use this to move my level prototype over to Blender, where I model the actual terrain. I created a separate model for the real terrain and manually modeled it around the sloppy reference blocks. The weird topology of the terrain model is not that easy to work with, but I feel like the prevalence of triangles helped me achieve the low poly visuals I'm going for. However, if I need to make any major level layout changes down the road, this could possibly come back to bite me. The game was taking a more non-linear direction, so I designed the map not as a path from point A to B, but as an area with multiple exits that go to different maps. Because the player might spend more time on the map, and also take different paths through it each time, simply scattering enemies throughout the level might make its gameplay too repetitive. Also, once the player defeated all of the enemies, it could be boring to just walk through the level without there being any combat. Because of this, I decided I need to make enemies spawn randomly in the level, or at least somewhat randomly. Many games will spawn enemies if there aren't any nearby. Typically, they do so close to the player, but outside of the player's vision. With the game's levels being designed like this, I couldn't make it completely randomized, as some points in the level aren't meant to be reachable. The option I went with was to create an actor that spawns enemies when near the player, and scatter instances of the actor throughout the level. These spawners are quite customizable. For instance, they could avoid spawning anything if the total enemy count in the level is above a set amount, or only spawn enemies if the player's current HP is above a certain amount. These options should hopefully allow me to tweak the gameplay in slight ways that maximize how fun levels are to play. From this point forward, my main focus will be on releasing a short demo for the game so that I can start receiving useful player feedback early on, before it's too late to make significant changes. I believe this process could potentially be really significant for maximizing the quality of the final game. After I polish up the demo version, then I can move on to creating the rest of the full game. And that's about it for this devlog. Until next time.